Tomorrow, the long-anticipated G7 summit in Kananaskis, Alberta gets underway. So today, leaders of some of the world's most advanced economies are descending on the Canadian Rockies. Among those attending, U.S. President Donald Trump, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. On the agenda for Prime Minister Mark Carney, improving bilateral ties with Trump and Modi and unifying Western leaders behind a just and lasting peace initiative for Ukraine. Here to dig into the challenges and opportunities ahead for Carney and Canada is former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Joe Clark. Mr. Clark, a pleasure to see you as always. Thank you for making the time.
Happy to.
I have some questions for you about the substance of the G7 itself, but I have to ask, as someone who represented Canada at the G7, we've got this unfolding situation in the Middle East. In more general terms, how do world events ultimately end up impacting the direction a summit like this could take?
Well, each summit is different, and I think one of the unusual factors of this summit with President Trump is that probably much more of the effective work will be done, in effect, off camera and away from some of the formal proceedings. And I know that the proceedings are not themselves broadcast live, but nonetheless, there is a performance aspect to his approach to public life that is not as productive as a quieter approach might be. I think one of Prime Minister Carney's strengths in getting started is that he, as well as anyone I've seen in dealing in public terms with the President, has been able to wait and find his time, not demand the stage, but make his case. And I think that he'll do that again here. As I say, the privacy of the discussions will add to that.
How integral do you think it is, or how important do you think it is, that there be that sort of away from the cameras moments with Donald Trump in order to ensure the summit is productive?
It's always essential. It was essential long ago when I was there, because what happens in the sort of the formal discussions is that you realize where there are some differences that need to be wound down a little bit, and that can occur both face-to-face by the leaders, but also by the excellent teams that every head of government brings to these things. So that's that work, the quiet work, as much off-screen as you can be, I think will be unusually important in this summit.
Heading into the summit, what do you view the point of it as? And I ask not, not with any callousness at all, but there's not going to be a communique. We already know that, for example. So we won't necessarily know, what are the shared priorities of these allies emerging from this meeting. And there's good reason for it. The last time Donald Trump attended one of these in Charlevoix, there was a ton of very public disagreement over the substance of that communique. So I guess in your view, given the sort of world environment at the moment, given the environment that Trump has largely informed, what is the point of the summit, or what should be the point, I should ask?
Well, I think what it throws into clear view is just how important these summits have been over time. I mean, I attended several of them, as a matter of fact, but only one as head of government. And that head of government one, when you look back all those years to 1979, not only brought in a revolutionary change in welcoming the boat people, which of course became even more important in Canada because so many citizens turned into it, but also it was the first time that climate change became a summit agenda. The point of that is not to recall history, but to make the point that at its best, these summits can get agreement on really difficult questions. And part of that is because at the end of the day, the discussions that will be decisive are among people who are themselves heads of government. Of course, we all rely heavily on our public servants, but in a situation on issues like this, the final decision has to come from the top. Now, how does one manage President Trump in a situation like that? Again, I think Carney's almost excessive politeness to the president was, I think, useful in establishing his credentials and his seriousness. And I think that one of the important questions is precisely how much room is how much is really possible in present circumstances, and I think whatever is possible, I think will be developed almost in the side conversations among both leaders and their key advisors.
Speaking of one of those side conversations, I did want to also get your input, Mr. Clark, on what has become one of the more scrutinized decisions of Prime Minister Carney when it comes to the G7, and that's the invite to India's Prime Minister, given the allegations leveled by the previous Prime Minister against the Modi government. Do you think it was the right decision to invite Prime Minister Modi, and how are you sort of viewing the conversation that could take place?
I think it is a right decision to invite other heads of government who are not parts of the G7. And I think that one cannot let one very serious disagreement and issue between Canada and India block that the development of that critical relation. I think, in fact, one of the strengths of the G7 is that it does bring others there. I'm particularly pleased to see that President Ramaphosa of South Africa is present, because I think that there has been a tendency from the world outside Africa to turn away from some of the dynamics in that continent, and I think his presence will help that. But on the Modi question, we're not going to agree with or approve of a lot of the things other heads of government do. It will, among other things, it does provide an opportunity, or it could provide an opportunity for things to be said privately, face to face, that might be more effective than all the highly accomplished diplomatic pressure that countries might be applying on Mr. Modi or on others.
On a bilateral basis, I think a lot of the framing around inviting other people or having conversations between Prime Minister Carney and other prime ministers is around finding new markets vis-a-vis the threat that we face from the United States and the change in the very specific change in posture when it comes to free trade, or now a lack thereof, between our two countries. I was wondering, from your perspective, if there is a so-called framework of a deal or a pact, an economic and security pact that is arrived at between Canada and the U.S., what, in your view, should Canada's objective in that be?
That's a hard question for me to answer from this distance. I'm not as current now with details as I was then. I think that the reality is that Canada, as the Prime Minister has recognized, that Canada was perhaps too relaxed in what we needed from, what we expected from our relation with the United States, and he is quite deliberately signaling that the relaxation has ended. What that will mean in actual terms, I can't predict, but I think it is the appropriate position for Canada to take. It's also an onerous position, because it's not simply a question of modulating our relations with the U.S. It is a question of deciding where and how and with what skill that can be developed with other countries.
And just finally, sort of jumping off exactly that point, I wonder, as somebody who has a very unique vantage point, who has occupied a position that very few Canadians have, because I haven't had an opportunity to interview you since Donald Trump started threatening our sovereignty or levying these tariffs, like, given your experience in the top office in this country, like, what has gone through, and leading this country, what has been going through your head as you watch that all unfold?
Well, he is a showman before he's a statesman, and we have to bear that in mind. There's some degree to that in everyone in public office. You can't ignore your media when you're conducting public policy now. But his inclination as a quite unique kind of showman is to make his own impact rather than find agreement. That's very difficult to deal with, but it's not impossible. One of the questions I think all of us are asking in regarding the United States is, who else is there around him who might be a restraining influence? And there's an interesting thought we should pursue, which is that the general disregard, the general concern among the allies and friends of the United States about where this aggressiveness might lead could well cause to some kinds of internal pressures in the U.S. that will be part of a pathway to better relations with Canada and with others.
I'll leave it on that note. Mr. Clark, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Joe Clark. We'll take a quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, we have more coverage looking ahead to the G7 summit in Alberta. And the last few days, Parliament is scheduled to sit. What do each of the political parties need to do ahead of the summer? Our Sunday strategy session with Dick Nanos, Lisa Raitt, and Scott Reed is up next.